We have got around to speaking about James Mulvey again of late, and largely because he features quite heavily in the BBC series Kinahan, The True Story of the Irish Mafia, which is running on a Monday night at 20 to 11 and is also, for those people listening or watching outside Ireland, available on the BBC Player. Unfortunately, if you're in the Republic, unless you have a scrambled IP address, which I know nothing about, you can't access the Player, but the series is doing really, really well. It's hugely popular on the Player, and it has also been broadcast on BBC in the UK. And it tells the story of the Kinahans from their beginnings in the 1980s in Ireland, when Christy Kinahan Sr. tries his hand at heroin dealing and then kind of quickly realises that he'll get involved in cocaine, ecstasy and everything else he can, firearms, and moves to Europe. And onwards, we follow the Kinahan organisation as it grows. But in the middle of it, of course, there was this character called James Mulvey. And he is a business partner of Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who is pretty much the Kinahans' number one operator, their CEO in the UK and over Ireland, really, the two. But Mulvey's a really interesting character, and he kind of has a colourful past. While he's originally from Solihull, I think it's called, in Birmingham in the UK, he is of Irish descent and he's a cousin of Gerard Hatchet Kavanagh, who will be murdered in Spain. But let's go back to the beginning with Mulvey and how he becomes involved in the Kinahan Mafia.
Yeah, I think if you've seen the documentary, the footage of him is actually great, because you can see the size of the guy, and just you get a sense even of his personality just because the NCA bugged him, so he's a big shaven-headed beast of a man, and he's got, at one point there's video of him surrounded by about 4 or 5 henchmen, and he's holding court, and he just looks the part,
but doesn't he? I mean, I think I actually mentioned on it.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to draw a drug dealer, what a drug dealer should look like, you'd draw Mulvey, wouldn't you?
You would, and
tattooed, bulked up on steroids.
But it's also
paranoid from his own cocaine use, and pretty violent and dangerous and scary.
Exactly, all of the above. The real deal in terms of even just his manner. I mean, I think we've spoken before about how some criminal figures come across in a certain way, but he has that threatening, just that manner. I suppose it shows another thing, because Mulvey is 49 now, and he's serving a 32-year sentence, basically for conspiracy to import and export cocaine, a European-wide operation, a huge operation. But I suppose it shows at the time, this is a lot of this focuses between 2006 and 2007. So that's nearly 20 years ago at this stage. And you can see, even at that stage, the scale of the Kinahan Cartel, and not just the Kinahan Cartel, but the Bomber Kavanagh wing of the Kinahan Cartel.
Interesting you should point that out, because Mulvey was only in his late 20s then?
He's only in his late 20s, and, he's ultimately convicted really of a snapshot. It's one seizure, really.
He doesn't look in his late 20s.
He doesn't. Well, no, that's a bit later, actually. Yeah,
a little bit later. I was going to say, is he one of those people that sort of is born looking like an older man? Some people can be.
He does, but I suppose this he's 49 now, so this snapshot in time that he would get this 32 years for, he's only effectively approaching his late 20s.
Yeah.
But they're already talking about, in that little period of time, they're talking about 100 million euros worth of drugs over 15 runs, basically. So the scale of them, even then, even just in the UK, is absolutely massive. And you can see as well, Bomber Kavanagh is running this transnational criminal organisation, and they haven't even reached their peak. We know that their peak comes sometime in the after Operation Shovel, maybe 2012, a bit later on, when they really hit the absolute massive big time. So
important, because we're going to have a look at those years of 2006, 2007, what was going on, and how Mulvey ultimately would be convicted in relation to what he was doing then. But that is also a time, so ultimately, while he is the boss of these plots we're going to talk about, there's a boss above him, and that's Bomber Kavanagh. But he isn't caught at this point. But Bomber Kavanagh has just left Ireland.
Yeah.
He has moved to Tamworth, where he leaves Ireland after he is targeted by the Criminal Assets Bureau. He's the first, him and the Penguin, actually, George the Penguin Mitchell, are the first two people on the list of the Criminal Assets Bureau. He loses a house to the Bureau in Drimnagh, which he sort of hands over, and he leaves supposedly penniless Ireland to start again in the UK. And he buys a house over there, I think in about 2004. Something called like White Sands is the name of the place. The address is familiar to me, but he sets up a car business over there, and he sets himself up as a legitimate businessman. And in around this time in 2006, 2007, he very quickly flips that house to another bigger one, which is the one that his family are actually still living in Tamworth, one where he was photographed, one where the NCA, the Guardia Civil and the Garda Síochána searched when Bomber's time eventually comes. But back then, Mulvey is a boss, but he's still not at the very tippy top.
No, so ultimately, Mulvey has a group of associates who are caught in relation to this plot. But you can hear in what was ultimately came these recorded conversations, he clearly has a man on top of him, a man he calls Glasses, who is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh.
He's no threat to me and I'm no threat to him. So that's what them texts are for. Do you understand? That's why he's texting me to see what my response is. Like I says, well, I'm agreeing with him. If he thinks it's a problem, or even just think, I think that he done it. But there's plenty of people getting put around over this.
You can see as well, I suppose, at that stage, the Bomber organisation is, while it's associated with the Kinahans the whole way through, and Christy Kinahan had also lived in that part of the world, they operate their own sort of franchise, I suppose. They maybe buy the cocaine from the Kinahans, but then they have their own transport networks. They have their own local dealers in the UK, and they also move the drugs to Ireland, where they have their own local dealers. So what ultimately happened, Mulvey, was that he was doing what Bomber would continue to do for the next 20 years. They were importing cocaine into the UK and ultimately onto Ireland in heavy machinery. In this case, it was, I think it was kind of rolling, big rolling machines, whatever they're for. We're not going to...
Rolly things?
Big rolly things.
Like for what? Rolling...
Well,
flattening land?
Yeah, stuff like that.
You don't have a clue.
I don't have a clue. Big things.
I could have said for rolling dough. Anyway, if anyone has pictures of these machines yet again, send them in.
Well, there actually is a picture of the machine, and I'm still don't of this Mulvey machine. I still don't know exactly what it does, but anyway, the purpose, they didn't care what it did either, to be honest. No. So the reason they use it is because they're bulky for a start. They get hollowed out. They're not going to be x-rayed easily. They're too big to be x-rayed. Even if they are x-rayed, there's too much concrete there, and it'll block the x-rays. And ultimately, they move this machinery into the UK 15 times over this period between 2006 2007. A guy in Belgium, an ordinary warehouse operator, becomes suspicious. It's not given exactly clear, but I imagine he's saying, why would you need all of these machines? They're so specialised, they're not going to be used. And the police come involved.
I'm slightly suspicious of that story.
Are you? Well, there you go.
Obviously police forces have to hide many's a time when their information is coming from intelligence. They're not going to be able to say that they're getting information from somebody, but an eagle-eyed port worker who sees the same machine going in and out a few times.
Well, there you go.
Maybe.
There you go. We'll never know. With the passage of time.
Anyway, isn't it?
So there's basically one shipment is seized, and it's got 364 kilograms of cannabis and 20 kilos of cocaine, and it's trafficked from the Netherlands to Belgium to England and then to Ireland. Now, they seize it. They uncover all the drugs in it. They then go back and look and see the same company did this 15 times, and then they estimate a value somewhere. There's different estimates given over the years, but they're talking somewhere between 70 to 100 million euros worth of drugs over those 15 ships. Now, there's 5 of his associates, 5 of Mulvey's associates are ultimately prosecuted and sentenced. But Mulvey, while the NCA looked through the phones and all of that, and they believe there's a boss directing the operations. I presume Mulvey is a chief suspect, but they don't have enough on him. The other guys are prosecuted. They're sent.
Let's name them just in case anybody out there has any information up to date on any of these people. There's a Barry Phipps, there's a Jeffrey Edwards, Tina Edwards, John Gilbert, and David Cullen.
Yeah, they're all basically done for these conspiracy charges for cocaine. The cocaine obviously ultimately ended up in Ireland as well, which is another interesting feature in it. So Mulvey's obviously been investigated. The NCA or the SOCA, I think at the time, they're hopeful of bringing charges against him. But we go back to the old days, and it probably has proven, at least in this case, to be slightly safer. He's all the time using burner phones, regular sort of pay-as-you-go phones, effectively.
Encrypted ones mustn't have been developed.
No, they weren't developed.
In development, rather.
Exactly, and maybe they should have stuck with them, the drug dealers. But he's changing his phones every couple of days. I think at one point they contact a legitimate businessman, a travel agent, and he's used over a short period of time 25 different numbers he's given the travel agent. So he's just constantly changing his phone every day or every couple of days. But the police are on his case, and he knows it. He knows he's at risk, so he flees to Spain. Now he's not charged, but he's gone out of the country. And at that point, what happens is that the police say ultimately when they bring him to court that he made himself unavailable for trial, and then he goes and he starts existing, as the NCA describe it, as a ghost. So he doesn't stay in any place in Europe for long. He's moving around for a period of time. He'd stay across Eastern Europe. He has a villa in Spain, and he's moving between these 5-star hotels, spending a huge amount of money. I think they describe it as spending £10,000 sterling a week in just living expenses. A week.
So that's in living expenses alone, which a lot of those expenses go on, seemingly on women and on drugs. Cocaine himself, he's a heavy cocaine habit. So that's £520,000 sterling a year. Just in your living expenses alone.
Yeah. Going around, they have footage of him, I think, at some point going into these 5-star hotels.
Paying in cash.
Big wad of cash in his pocket, big shaven-headed sort of character.
Before you move on, let's just talk about that villa in southern Spain that he has, because it's purchased for 1.4 million. But actually, the purchase of it links in later with...
It does.
A house here in Dublin owned by Sean McGovern, currently wanted for murder of Noel Duckegg Kerwin, and in Dubai, and who knows?
Yeah, so we
see him back, but the house is purchased through a company in Mauritius.
Yes, so Mauritius would be one of these countries people use because their banking regulations are very different than ours, let's put it that way. And there's an ability to set up companies and trusts that are effectively invisible to international police forces. But this villa, obviously Mulvey is seen going in and out of it. It's in Malaga, beautiful villa. There's a private pool, everything you could ever imagine. There's a rake of people going in and out. Daniel Kinahan is also seen staying there at one point.
Right.
Mulvey has an assistant, effectively, who also stays there a lot. At some point, there's a raid on his wife's house.
There's a wife?
He has a wife. He has many girlfriends, because that also becomes a big feature of the case.
Yeah.
He has many girlfriends. He has like an official girlfriend as well as a wife, as well as others, and
a lot of domestic violence going on with him. I mean, including this one suggestion that he beats up a girlfriend in a brothel, who I presume is a girl who's working in a brothel.
Well, I don't know. There's another point at which he's effectively recorded, or there's an incident recorded where he has a kilo of coke. He's with a girlfriend, becomes paranoid and puts it down a drain, which is, well, it's a street value of 70,000. So he's obviously very paranoid. But how the villa they become aware the villa is in his name. They raid her home. They see some documents. On those documents, there's a name, but there's also architectural. They're getting work done on it, and it's all James Mulvey's name is associated. Mr. James making the decisions. So they then trace it back to Mauritius, and it's owned by this trust. It's in somebody else's name, but the name of the person purchasing it, he then transferred to this trust, and ultimately James Mulvey's family are the owners of that trust. So he's effectively bought this and disguised the ownership of it. The reason that also would be not a surprise to us is because in the case of Sean McGovern, when Cab did seize his home, it was done using the same trust in Mauritius. Sean McGovern had a house in Crumlin just across the way from Leanburn and was bought using the same technique. So this is obviously, and also remember the Kinahans were also using that area as well, that banking area at one point.
Very much showing the links, like very, very strong links between Mulvey, Sean McGovern, obviously, into Daniel Kinahan. Daniel Kinahan's going staying in that place in Malaga or in Marbella, did you say?
Malaga, it says, yeah.
When he's around sometimes. There's also, as they continue to, because the NCA are continuing to try and work out how they can actually charge Mulvey in relation to this when his other associates were charged and convicted in 2009. He sort of was the one who got away, the big guy got away. So they continue kind of agitating at that case and looking at it and seeing how they can put together a charge for him. And they're doing that they're bringing strands of the investigation together. Those mobile phones you spoke about, those burner phones, the fact that he has so many of them actually end up being part of the case against him.
Yeah, it's an interesting case actually how they built it, because at some point in 2015 or 2016, Mulvey starts coming back to the UK. He obviously believes that, 6-7 years, that if he was going to be charged, he would have been charged by now.
Yeah.
So when he comes back, the West Midlands police become aware of it and they start putting together this investigation, which basically seems initially involves following him, seeing who he's meeting, trying to record those meetings, trying to gather evidence in that way, which they do successfully, and they do it over that 2-year period. They follow him.
Some of those footage is what we're referring to that's on the BBC.
It is.
So the Kinahans, the true story of the Irish Mafia.
But they follow him and they see him meeting all these people that are involved in the drugs business, and they know clearly what he's up to. But he always stays one step away from any drugs, basically.
Yeah.
Drugs or money. He's at that level that he never has to be physically present. He's obviously using phones or he at least thinks he's using phones more successfully. And what they do at that point is, rather than trying to catch him currently, they go back to the 2009 case and they look to see if his current activities can be connected with what went on in the past. They know, obviously, they have all of the phone communications from his 5 associates. There's clearly a boss in the background, and they have to try and then put it all together. And they do it successfully because they have him recorded over this 2-year period. Now, he's never saying, that £100 million worth of coke that's coming in there. He doesn't say that, but he says enough to get himself in trouble.
You need to listen to what I say. I want to be with you. I love you. But this is what my life was. I'm trying to get away with it. But I don't want you involved in it. Do you not understand how these people work? Do you not understand? If they can't get to me, they go to the people you love. They kill the people you love. 270 grand went missing. Yeah. And he went all through the cover. I think he's going to be back. Yeah. So if he's got it back, I'm going to take his company off him. Yeah. That's running proper. That's 20 Arctic as well. Ford is just doing Spain. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So the bigger try and stick with me tonight is a bigger picture, son.
I mean, at one stage he says, do you remember when we used to do bits and bobs with Barry Phipps, who was one of the aforementioned people that was convicted. He's also, interestingly, while he's under this surveillance in Dublin, staying in the Westbury Hotel and believed to be meeting Daniel Kinahan.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, Daniel Kinahan regularly stayed in the Westbury whenever he was in this country. It was very much, it's one of Dublin's top hotels. It was very much a place that they like to use. So Mulvey is moving in and out, and that also is a huge feature ultimately in the case against them, because they build the strands of this case. One of them is that he speaks about these 2009 cases. Another one that the prosecution rely on very heavily is his criminal contacts. They make a very clear case that this is the people that James Mulvey is involved in. Ultimately, when the case comes to court, in the prosecution, they mention Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh and they mentioned Thomas Kavanagh by name, which I don't think was reported at the time, but they are mentioned in the case put forward by the state.
And Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh by that point is dead.
Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh is dead. He's dead probably about a year when Mulvey comes to court. And Mulvey is recorded talking about them and talking about that murder. That also features in the evidence. It's not just colour. It's featuring to show that he describes himself in very vivid terms as being one of 4 bosses who set this business up. And the 4 bosses he refers to, he talks about a guy Glasses, which is, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, wears glasses, and that's his nickname. He talks about Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh, who was ultimately shot dead. He talks about Paul Kavanagh, Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh's younger brother, and again, a relative of Mulvey's, and he talks about himself as the 4 bosses who set that up.
And actually some of the audio from that is on that Kinahan series, because you hear him talking about saying that Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh is his cousin.
Yeah.
And that this cousin has been shot, and the other cousin, who is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, set him up.
Yeah, he says.
Killed.
Yeah, he says he will have known what had happened at the very least, effectively. And he said he's talking about the 4 of them setting up. He says 4. When we started, there were 4 bosses: me, Glasses, him who's just got shot dead, and another kid. The other kid's dead. He's dead. So there's just me and Thomas left, mate. So he's describing Paul Kavanagh would be shot dead a number of months after Gerard Kavanagh was shot dead in Drumcondra, where he'd been staying. Paul Kavanagh was another significant drug dealer, though probably less infamous. And they also give evidence as well in Mulvey's case about how close he was with Hatchett Kavanagh, that at one point they're stopped in France with, wedges of cash, basically. So that also is a part of the case.
To go back to that, to the Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh murder now, which is a very confusing theory. I've spoken about this before, but it's what I believe to have been the case, that Daniel Kinahan convinced Thomas Bomber Kavanagh that Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh had hatched a plot to kidnap one of his children, and he was going to supposedly kidnap one of Bomber's kids and claim €1 million ransom, which is a very complex crime to commit against your own cousin.
Yeah.
And also between jurisdictions, very high risk kidnap. It makes no sense, really, especially if you're involved in this kind of level of drug dealing. €1 million, $1 million, £1 million, whatever it is not very much money. It's kind of pocket change. But Daniel Kinahan nonetheless is understood to have convinced Bomber that this was the case, and had the hit against Hatchett sanctioned by Bomber. Now,
you see, there was also, exactly. And there was also another theory about the motivation behind that, because it was felt that Kinahan wanted to bring Bomber in even closer into the inner circle. Like Bomber Kavanagh had kind of, he'd always been a client of the Kinahans effectively, but some of those operations had been slightly different as well.
I think they were sort of seen as being the same level.
Yeah.
That's how it would always have been described. And the motivation for the hit on Hatchet, I don't believe it was to bring Bomber closer. I think Bomber was the same level as Daniel. I actually think it was personal. I just don't think Daniel Kinahan liked Hatchet Kavanagh. I think he thought he disrespected him.
Yeah.
And of course, Hatchet Kavanagh's son, Jamie Kavanagh, who's no involvement in organised crime, he was a boxer. He had Hatchet was kind of like managing him nearly for a period of time.
Yeah.
And he brought him to the States and he set him kind of with the training regime out there at the point in time that Daniel Kinahan is building MGM and looking for big names to sign. And I think that Kinahan saw that as disrespect on behalf of Hatchet. And I think I think he didn't like him. He cooked up the story. And he had the murder of Hatchet sanctioned, so it was never going to come back to bite him. He couldn't have taken out Bomber Kavanagh's partner without it being sanctioned.
No, and that's obviously what Mulvey believes in. It's what he says. And you can see Mulvey, despite the level at which he's operating in the criminal underworld, the genuine fear he has of the people ahead of him, which is effectively Daniel Kinahan and Bomber Kavanagh. Yeah. And he describes the Irish as being the maddest and the most dangerous. And, they'll go after you, but they won't just go after you. They'll go after everybody that you love.
Yeah.
And, this is a guy who's feared across England and the continent, and he's living in terror, really, of those two people. And Bomber Kavanagh certainly had that ability, and we've seen that again and again in the communications that have become public, how afraid people were of him.
The ruthless nature of those two heads of organisations coming together really, set the Kinahan and the Irish mob and mafia aside from others at that time. But we're talking about Mulvey being afraid and being caught, on bugged phone calls, basically saying he was pretty much afraid of them and they were capable of anything, and, he was still alive, but he was kind of like, but look at him and what he has done, and particularly there's women involved in this case against him who give evidence, one of whom was put on witness protection and is no doubt living under an assumed identity elsewhere. But there was a number of women who gave character sort of references and evidence of his lifestyle. And they spoke about him like viciously attacking them and others and, eating the cocaine and having this mad paranoia, and obviously everywhere he went, he had the wife. I didn't realise he had a wife, actually, to be honest with you. He packed a lot in, didn't he?
He packed a lot in, he did.
But everywhere he goes, and even you see in some of the video footage, there's a woman there. Yeah. There's always a woman at his side. But a huge, hulking guy. I mean, you can imagine him smashing up a woman.
Oh, totally. I mean, and, it's such a common feature of gangland criminals, domestic violence. It's a sort of thing that we only ever touch upon, but it's so common in that world. But Mulvey, he's described him as hulking, and probably the first time he makes the papers in a major way is when footage is released of him being arrested in Lithuania, because eventually a European arrest warrant is issued in 2017, and he's arrested in one of these 5-star hotels in Lithuania. The footage comes out and he's lying on the floor bare-chested and he's taken away. And that begins then, they put all of these strands together. But as you see in the programme, even after he's arrested and extradited back, they continue to monitor his father and other people.
And bug him in prison, because a lot of the conversations he has in prison when he's talking about the case
Yeah.
against him are used in evidence.
They are, and some of the conversations, all of the conversations can be recorded, but the police use it in a clever way to show that he's part of a criminal organisation. Effectively, at one point he talks about getting other people to pay his legal bills, and that's used against him. There's also the fact that his father, who's not involved in crime, meets with Bomber, and we had it in the Sunday World how he also met with Sean McGovern. So Bomber's obviously clearly applying a degree of pressure. He wants to see court papers. Mulvey says don't show it to his father. But all of this is ultimately used against him. Interestingly, there's the prison cell next to his is raided at one point, and a phone is seized, and it's clear Mulvey has been using that phone, and he continues to say stuff that's indiscreet, but he also manages to get through to some woman somehow, and he tries to flirt with her, and he's telling her he's in prison and he's a bad boy and all this. So even at his lowest, he's continuing to try and
to that. And I suppose really as he goes down for his 30 plus years in prison, because of this quite incredible case really that the NCA build for him, we move on to that man above him, to Bomber Kavanagh, who ultimately, is trying to protect himself as Mulvey goes down, but his time is coming, and all of that has to be for a second part of this podcast, because that is equally as intriguing and interesting, and to see and watch how the NCA built that case against him, is a whole other story. But all the while, Bomber is continuing to wheel in and out those drugs. How much has he made over his...
Well, exactly. So, I mean, this is a snapshot in 2006 and 2007. And pick your choice between... I just read different valuations. I'm sure there's a final valuation, but it's clearly over it's 70 million sterling, so it's 80. So that's only over that one period of time. And that's one wing of that organisation. It's not even all of that organisation. So, I mean, it's a bewildering amount of money, because certainly they had another boom then in the 2000 after Operation Shovel. I mean,
2014, 2015 must have been Bomber Kavanagh's
peak
moment, and it was then that he was wheeling in and out of this country on the ferry because he was driving more and more expensive cars. He was laden down with gifts. He was paying for extravagant holidays, just eye-watering holidays, and living it up. But
and again, he will be done for a snapshot in time where they could connect mobile phones to importations. But it's only a tiny snapshot. I don't know what the final figure on that one. That was very disputed in court what they could prove, and that I think it was 30 million ultimately. But it just shows you the absolute scale. And look, it's nobody will ever be able to put a final figure on it. But
Mulvey is languishing currently anyway in prison. His days of drug dealing are long behind him. He has a long time to spend, and if he gets out, it'll be on licence, which some would say is as bad as prison.
Though he is obviously convicted, but in 32 years in a British context really means 16. That's they effectively...
Totally sure about that.
Well, okay, but it could be longer.
No, I'm not now, because we've both been sort of describing that, but I have been told differently as well, that it's not necessarily halved in the UK.
No.
It's just some of them can be halved and they can get out on strict licensing for the rest of them. More recently, we've seen the prisons are full up, and they've let, like many people, including Liam Byrne, out. But I'm not sure we're 100% correct. And if anybody out there knows exactly how it operates in the UK, please do let us know.
But either way, he served 9 years.
He served 9 and he's 49.
Yeah.
Right.
Then he will be, maybe not the last run, but he's
even if he gets out in another 10, he's only going to be 59.
Yeah, and he will then be under these huge, as you say, restrictions, because that's guaranteed that if they do let you out on licence, you won't be allowed to associate with people, you won't be allowed to have money in your bank account. There'll be, the women may not find him as attractive without his hundreds of millions.
You may not. You never know. But maybe it's that I wonder, is he still bulked up, behind bars, or has it all gone a little bit?
Think he could?
Yet again, I fat shame him.
No, well, yes, you can crime shame. You can crime shame people, but not fat shame.
Gotta stop doing that. Okay, well, look, let's park that for the moment, and we'll come back in this series to part 2, which is when Bomber Kavanagh really takes up the mantle.
Yes.
Thanks, Niall.
Thanks very much, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.